So do you remember in The Watchmen, there's that one line about the comedian, and he says basically, whatever happened to the American dream? No, sorry, I got that wrong. Night Owl, the second Night Owl goes, whatever happened to the American dream? And the comedian's there and he says, you're looking at it. And the panel shows the comedian standing in front of this crowd that they're basically asked to suppress. So do you remember more or less that scene? Well, there's a scene like that, okay, whether you've watched the film adaptation or the actual graphic novel. And it's great ambiguity because we don't really know if the comedian is talking about himself or we're talking about this kind of riot that's happening there. Okay. So that's those are two answers that you could provide, is that one is that the comedian himself, which we'll get to, is the American dream personified, or the American dream isn't really real. It's just there and it's actually a problem. One of the things that I kind of realize is um, we might not all be able to live the American dream, however you define that. We might not be able to all live it, but we all do have to suffer the nightmare of it. Okay. In other words, even if you're quote unquote successful, you're still harmed by this way of life. And even if you're not an American, it turns out you're still harmed by its great influence, which is phrasing it lightly, on the whole globe, right? Because America is dominant culturally, often politically, economically. It's all the schemes that go on really impact things worldwide. Okay. Um, but anyways, even if we're ignoring that aspect, even if you're a wealthy American, the way you accumulated your wealth, or the way you were born into your wealth, or the way that you understand life, or the fact that um, absent to you are things like actual community, which, remember, a community is different from a crowd, right? Actual community, actual good family life, actual um, stability in your finances, actual love between husband and wife, and filiality from your children, etc. Right? All of those are not quite what they should be because you live according to an American paradigm. We can call it Americanism. All right. Um, does that follow? I mean, you kind of understand what I mean here. So, um, that's kind of another way to look at this. Like we all suffer the American nightmare, right? Even if you don't succeed in getting whatever that is. I mean, to a lot of Americans, the American dream is just a house, a couple kids, maybe a dog or a cat, and that's it, and stability. And I think that's really sad because that's not a dream. That's just basic living. And you don't even have that many kids in this so-called dream. All right. It's and then there's like the petty version of it, which is like I just have a lot of money. Well, that's really sad too, right? So whatever variation of the dream I've heard of, it just reflects poorly on Americans. Okay. Um, but I think that going back to this idea that, either the American dream, what happened to it is that it never came true, or it's actually a nightmare. That's one way to interpret the scene in the Watchmen. Okay. But another way to look at this is that the comedian is the personification of the American dream, right? In other words, you have this guy, he has a witty sense of humor, he's very deadly in combat, and he's gone in and out of not politics itself, but statesmen basically use him. Okay. If you kind of remember that, right? He's sent to various places. All right. And so he is, in a sense, the personification of the American dream, right? This kind of cowboy figure that does what he wants to his own benefit and has a sense about humor about it and is very charismatic. But if you really look at him, this is kind of not really the person you want as a neighbor, or the person you really want. to be yourself, if you can look at this objectively. Not that any of these characters fulfill that criteria in the Watchmen, but there's something there where he could be seen as a personification of the American dream. Okay. And that gets me to kind of what I thought was going to be more of the central topic, which is um, Donald Trump as actually the fulfillment of democracy, kind of another personification of the American dream. Okay. How so? Because um, Trump is somebody who is very good at talking. He's got a great, he's got a pretty what you might call wicked or in a slang kind of way, right? He's got a pretty funny sense of humor for a politician, right? He's probably the funniest president we've ever had. He's very glib, right? He says stuff and he kind of shoots off the hip to use go back to that cowboy metaphor, right? And so he has, kind of a reputation for telling things as it is, and that's how he becomes popular. He has no real political experience. He's never been a governor, a senator, or, a state assemblyman, et cetera, et cetera. He's only aimed for the presidency, and I think that's worked in his favor, right? Because the bigger his goal, the bigger the dream he could sell you. And what is he ultimately? He's a salesman. He's a marketer, right? He's a snake oil salesman, you could say, right? He's very good at selling you the dream. So if you were going to run for something smaller, he couldn't do that, right? He has to go for president, all right? And people were desperate enough to go, hey, let's go with this guy. He's the only guy who's recognizing things are going wrong. He's the only guy who's not pretending things are better than it actually is. Okay. So you could actually really apply this question of, whatever happened to the American dream, you're looking at it to Donald Trump, whether you think, right, he himself is a personification of this, right? That, his life is about amassing wealth and then gaining power and then being popular and being glib and having a wry sense of humor. Okay. That's one way to look at it. Or you could see his America, the America that brought him into power in the first place, the America that happens after he has been exercising power, the America that's falling apart. That's another way to answer whatever happened to the American dream, right? So in either case, you're looking at it.